Hey, how's it going? Stephen here with a video based on a comment I got from one of my subscribers over at understandingaudio.com. This great comment is in the context of when this guy is watching my videos and videos from other mixing engineers online. So here's what he said, and this is slightly paraphrased. Some of the before and after examples that I see and hear, I can't tell the difference unless it's blindingly obvious. All the subtle tweaks pass me by. Now, I think this is a fantastic point for many reasons, mainly because it highlights how subtlety can actually make your mixes great. I definitely feel there's a time and place for heavy compression, lots of distortion and use of really elaborate effects, but a lot of the concepts I teach are based on subtle methods and systems. The best way to explain how subtlety can make your mixes great is to demonstrate it. For me, there's no better way to show how subtle tweaks can make such a big difference than with strings. The track you're about to hear is In Motion by the brilliant Ava. I'm going to play it for you first with the processing on the strings and then without. First time round, you might not have heard the differences, so here are a few things to listen out for. The piano and synth tracks aren't as bright with the effects off. The synth chords have much less impact when the processing is off on the strings, and there's much less support from the staccato strings. So let's have one more listen. Did you notice those subtle differences? Now you can see that there are quite a few string tracks in this piece. What you'll also notice is that there's next to no processing on these tracks. Let's listen to the strings on their own without any processing at all, and then with processing on. As you've heard, the differences are subtle, but going back to that great comment that my subscriber made, I want you to make sure that they don't pass you by. I want to explain why I've done things this way, and with a few listens, hopefully you'll be able to hear that in the context of the mix, my choices serve it a lot better and they really bring about what the artist is aiming to achieve in the first place. The reason why there's very little processing on the string parts is simply because I don't like to do a whole lot of processing on orchestral parts. I much prefer accentuating the elements that need it and cutting out problem frequencies or elements of an instrument that don't quite complement the mix as a whole. In this particular section, I wanted the viola parts, the cello part, and the staccato strings to be present, but complement the piano parts and underlying synth parts. You can hear that these are nicely balanced together already with just my fader mix, and I haven't done a whole lot to the strings except subtle tweaks because they're played beautifully and recorded well. You'll also notice that the main viola line also has reverb printed on it already. That means I have to get the more dry string parts to match that and have it feel like they're in the same space. In terms of processing, what I've done is bus all of the strings to this all strings bus. And on there, I've got 2 EQs and a compressor. The plugins that I'm using are the Mag EQ, FabFilter Pro Q, and FabFilter Pro MB multiband compressor. You don't need these exact plugins to achieve what I've done because you'll hear that a lot of it is simple, subtle EQ moves and very slight compression. Stock plugins in any DAW will do the exact same thing. Let's hear what the Mag EQ is doing. I've added 1 dB on the air band to add just that, a little bit of air to the strings. There's no level trim here. I was conscious that I didn't want the strings to have a nasal or a shrill quality, but I did want to add some air and brightness. The next plugin up is the FabFilter Pro Q. I've made some cuts and 1 boost with this EQ. Keep in mind that this is in the context of the overall string section throughout the whole mix. These are the areas that needed balancing overall. So again, going back to the main point about subtlety, you won't hear a big difference. What you can hear is that there's a better blend between the viola, the cello parts, and the staccato strings. What I've done is a cut of -1.7 at 369 Hz, -4 at 1.8K. This one really helps to keep the staccato strings from sounding too sharp. -1.5 at 3.2K, and again, a boost at 11K of about 2 dB. And that's to add some more air to the string section. And again, these 2 EQs, the Pro Q2 and the Mag EQ, are a lot more noticeable in the context of the full mix. The one other plugin that I have active is the FabFilter Pro MB. It's a multi-band compressor and only there to control some of the string elements that stick out slightly in the mix. I don't like to heavily compress strings or orchestral instruments. I only wanted this compressor to kick in at certain points where the strings were slightly taking over. I wanted them to be the star of the show but not overpowering. It's an ebb and flow type of sound, and multi-band compression can be really great for this. So what this plugin is doing is controlling the swells and volume on the viola. As it rises through, it's taking off a little bit off the top and reducing 1 to 2 dB every now and then at the peak of those swells. You can see that I've got these 2 staccato string tracks sent to this staccato strings bus, but they're also processed through the overall string bus. Looking at the bus processing for these tracks, we've got an EQ adding 8 dB at 187, and that's to add a lot of presence to these strings. A cut of -3.3 at 2631, and then a low pass at 9935. The reason for this EQ is because I wanted to add some presence and remove some harshness so that they blend better with the lead parts and support them more, rather than masking important frequencies. I was trying to round out the sound and take a little bit of harshness out of it. The other plugin I've included is a Saturator, and this is the PM analoger. You can use any saturator like the free Softtube plugin or anything you want. The great thing about this plugin is that it has a mix knob. If you don't have a saturator with a mix knob, just use a send to the saturator and adjust the level of the send. In this application, this plugin isn't level matched because I prefer the sound without adjusting the output of it. This saturator was used to flatten out the sound of these strings, and even while they're staccato, it adds more of a roundness to them and removes some of the transients. I will reiterate, that plugin is not level matched, so it is adding level as well as saturation. The only other EQ I've added is this stock Pro Tools 7-band EQ, and that's on one of these staccato violin tracks. There's a cut of minus 1.5 at 959 Hz, and also in the low mids at 362, there's a cut of minus 1.3. They're the frequencies that stood out when I swept around that range. Very subtle once again. The output of this one has been adjusted by 1 dB to make up for some of the frequencies that we've cut out. We've also got some slap delay, a half note delay, and a reverb. The slap delay is an air dynamic delay with a simple slap on it. This is a slightly adjusted preset. The half note delay is the PM Echo Flex. And the reverb is a Manny Marroquin large hall reverb. So those three effects together sound like this. Those sends are used to give those particular strings more depth and ambience so they sit in the mix better and blend with the viola and cello tracks that came with reverb already on them. Let's have a listen to the strings with and without processing. You might still be wondering, what's the difference between what you've played me with the processing on and off? And I think this really exemplifies the point that we have to think about mixing the whole track together at once rather than the individual parts. These subtleties are only really noticeable when we hear them in the context of the whole mix. Now you know why I've made these not so obvious mixing decisions and why I feel they complement the mix. Let's have another listen to this section with the plugins on and then with them off and see if you can spot the differences. Like I said earlier, what you'll probably have noticed is that the impact of the synth tracks and the brightness of the piano notes themselves are a lot more noticeable when we have the processing on the strings. Hopefully you can now hear that all these really subtle EQ, compression, saturation, delay and reverb moves make a big difference to the mix. They might not be blindingly obvious when you hear the individual instruments in solo, but when you listen to the mix as a whole, they can make a huge difference. Once again, subtlety isn't something that you need all the time, and you might have noticed that I have an ATB boost at 10k on the staccato strings, which you wouldn't really call a very subtle boost, and I tend to agree with you. But I felt that an ATB boost to add presence to those strings was needed. So subtle moves and not so subtle moves have their place in every mix, but I hope you can see now that subtlety can really make your mixes great. The reason why I use bus processing and on strings in particular is because I like dynamics in music, and overcompressed, oversquashed strings are something that I really don't like. If I overcompress the strings in this particular mix, it'd affect all those beautiful melodies and you'd just have a really squashed mix without any dynamics. In my opinion, that's no good. Again, that's just my taste. I don't want to see a squashed sausage waveform, but your taste might be different, and that's what makes us unique as mixers. I really feel that one of the most important things you can do is quantify your taste as a mixer. I think it's so important that it's a big part of my free guide that I have for you. The one hack that guarantees a unique pro-sounding mix. I've put together this free guide for you to help you take massive leaps forward on your audio journey, simply by using your own taste and applying some very simple techniques to your own mixes. So to grab the guide, just go to getpromixes.com. Like the use of subtlety in mixing, this one hack was an absolute game changer for me, and it's something I still use to this day on every mix. So once again, if you want to drastically improve your mixes and stand out from the crowd, go to getpromixes.com and download the guide for free. Don't forget to leave a comment below about how subtlety has helped you and your mixes, and I'll be back with another video soon.